I am texting you a video this week because the topic is so important. Cognitive distortions, distorted thinking, is something that we all struggle with. And I know for me, before I went on my self-betterment journey, it wasn't just a way of thinking, it became a way of life, right? It was my quicksand. It was hard for me to notice the truth because I was mostly living in my head. And what's dangerous about cognitive distortions is that it becomes a pattern, right? And as you pull more from your distorted thinking, whether it's black or white thinking or jumping to conclusions or future tripping. I did a lot of that, right? Where you're not able to live in the present because you're constantly thinking about the future, and those thoughts injecting fear and panic, and then suddenly your state changes and nothing good happens there, right? Or you're dwelling in the past. Thinking that someone is thinking something about you without facts, right? All of these things that we all struggle with, if you do it so much where it can consume you, then it's going to put you into obviously a lower frequency, but also in a subtle fight or flight panic mode. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't talk about. It's not just about the thinking, it's about the result of your thinking. And what I mean by that is the feeling you have in your body. And I believe that if you are always in a worry, fight or flight, even if it's subtle, panicky state, which I was for half of my life, it's really impossible to thrive. And so I came up with a little acronym for cognitive distortions. Hopefully this helps you. It helps me. So it's not just about being aware of them, but it's about starting to dissolve them, right? And again, there's no right or wrong way. This is something that works for me that I want to share with you guys. So here it is. It's ITC GSR. And I know that may be difficult to remember. For me, GSR is a type of a motorcycle. And so that comes easy for me. So I just have to remember the ITC part, and then knowing that GSR is a type of a motorcycle, and so that I remember that. Obviously, if you're not into motorcycles, maybe you could remember that this crazy Korean therapist created this acronym, and he likes motorcycles, so maybe GSR you could tag with that. But it's ITC GSR. The I stands for to identify, right? So you can't do anything until you identify. And of course, with identification comes awareness. So being aware of your thoughts. So what you do, or what can help, is to slowly pull back and see your thoughts as you're looking through a snow globe. And so you're noticing, and by doing that, you're going to identify them, right? A lot of times we get sucked into our thoughts because we attach to our thoughts. We get hooked. A lot of our thoughts produce emotion, and because of that emotion, because of that feeling, and usually it's negative, we then fall into the quicksand, the trenches, right? That slippery well. So identifying from a distance your thoughts and noticing when you are falling into distorted thinking, when you are jumping to conclusions, when you are all or nothing, right? Black and white thinking, all the cognitive distortions. And of course, you're going to have maybe like 4 or 5 that you tend to do the most. So notice them, identify them. What is your thinking pattern? If it helps, write them down. Not only identify, also, and this is really important, play out what that looks like. So it's really important to play out what you're thinking, your cognitive distortions, how that plays out in your life. So if you do struggle with sitting in grays and you're all or white, right? You're either the winner or loser. There is no second place. If that is your type of thinking, how does that affect your relationships, your work, your career, maybe as an athlete? So across the board in all areas of your life, how does your thinking affect your behavior and ultimately the decisions you make and ultimately your life. So be aware of that, identify it. 2, T. T doesn't stand for two. T stands for trial. So you're putting your thoughts on trial. Put on your lawyer hat and try to prove if your distortion is true. And most likely it is not, because it is a distortion. It's not truth. Just because you feel something doesn't mean that it's a fact, right? Obviously it's okay and you should allow yourself to feel, but feelings are not facts. Sometimes someone will say something that they didn't mean, but because we feel it or because of our distorted thinking, we then react or behave in a way based off false or based off our own perception, not of truth. Does that make sense? So make sure that you put your thinking on trial. Third step is the C, and the C stands for compassion. This is not a throwaway step. This is really important because with our distorted thinking comes judgment and us bashing ourselves. So make sure that as you're going through this process and you are working on dissolving your cognitive distortions, which of course is a practice. This may be something you start today, but it doesn't end today. It never ends, actually, right? It's a practice for the rest of your life. You have to practice self-compassion because you're going to bash yourself. You're going to think, call yourself names. You're going to get mad at yourself because you made a decision based on distorted thinking, and suddenly you're waiting for him to call or her to do this or whatever, or maybe it led to another rejection, and then you're going to get really hard on yourself. So you got to practice self-compassion through this process. Okay, the next one is G, and G stands for gray. So a lot of our distorted thinking comes from not being able to sit in the gray. So, with life, maybe there's no wrong or right, but there only is what is. The ability to accept and sit in the not knowing, right? The unknown, I think, which is very difficult. A lot of people can't do that because it brings up anxiety, like they have to have answers. And if you have to have answers, then that may lead you through a path of distorted thinking, and now you're sinking and you're spinning and you're in that slippery well that I described earlier. So learning to sit in the gray, learning to accept the resistance and what's difficult, learning to understand that it's not always black and white. There is no all or nothing. There is no winner or loser. There can be something in between, and it's okay. So sitting in grays is a big door to enter if you want to stop your distorted thinking. The next one is S, and that S stands for shoulds. And you guys have all heard this idea of not shooting on yourself. I think we all do it. The thing with shoulds, shoulds are loaded. They're lined with pressure. They're lined with definitions that may not belong to you, right? When someone says you should, or you say that you should, or like you should be married, or you should have a job at this age, or a career, or a child, or whatever, a lot of those shoulds aren't honest to us. A lot of those shoulds are based on advertising or have been passed down from our parents. A lot of those shoulds involve us comparing our lives with someone else. So whenever you are pushing yourself or putting that should stamp on your forehead, you can easily jump into distorted thinking, right? You can easily then go into all or nothing, jumping to conclusions. Like for example, you should be married at this age, and if you're not, then it means something else, right? And that's where it gets dangerous, and that's where that distortion can suck you under, because you're not married today at this age, then it means you're whatever, a loser or old, or all that kind of stuff. So living with a lot of shoulds can trigger your distorted thinking. And the final one is R, and that is redefine. Whenever you're able to redefine things, you are creating a space for something new, and in that new is a new way of thinking. So inherently, when you create a new definition, you then shift your thinking because you're looking at something with fresh eyes, right? You're redefining something. And so it doesn't matter if we're talking about redefining what love looks like, what dating looks like, redefining what happy means, redefining, all of the things that we struggle with. It's important that we create new definitions. So we are constantly creating that space to not fall into our distorted thought patterns, but creating a new way of thinking, if that makes sense. All right, guys, so that's just a quick acronym and a step-by-step way to start dissolving and practicing this. Make sure you identify your cognitive distortions, your stinking thinking, as they call it, or your distorted thinking, your thought patterns. Identify, put those thoughts on trial, put on your your lawyer hat. Self-compassion, be compassionate to yourself as you're doing this. Sit in the grays, that's the G. And then question are your shoulds. Try to live without shoulds. And then the final thing is to redefine. So if you practice this, ITC, GSR, you will start to hopefully dissolve your distortions and live a life that is more honest instead of in your head. Guys, thank you for being a part of this community. And I just want to remind you, if you're not in the Facebook group, jump in. There's probably about 1,500. It's a great intimate group and with like-minded people. And if you want to go deeper, just reminding you to jump in there. If not, then you'll get a text from me tomorrow. All right, be well.